discussion will be, I think the brief was, can we discuss what's happening on the overall macroeconomy, especially with the US, what's happening in AI, what's happening in India, and can we cover in 30 minutes? To be honest, very challenging task, because right now if you look at the first two fronts, almost a week is like a decade. I mean, I think the kind of pace we have seen on both the macroeconomic movement as also on the AI is just honestly unprecedented. But I'll still give it a shot, and let's see. We'll talk about it and try and do a quick summary of this. So let me start with the US. I mean, whether we like it or not, the reality is, so far it has been a single polar world. I mean, maybe, you can call dual polar with China being there. And US does have a huge revelation across the world economy. So before I just get into, what we see so far in terms of action, I think all of you are fairly plugged on that. Just want to reflect on where US has been over the last 4 or 5 years, the world has been doing. And at least where we see this, it's a fairly delicately poised setup. You look at the overall GDP growth, it has been stable around 3%. Inflation has been under control, not where Fed would want to be around 2.5%, but still at good 3% and it's stable there. The overall confidence levels are good. Unemployment is not on a very high level, so things pretty much in control. That's what the left kind of chart talks about. But if you look at the things which have been ailing, and this is not something which is new, we have been hearing for decades now. The fiscal deficit levels remain extraordinarily high. The debt is 124%, which is one of the highest in the world. And the fact that there is a huge amount of consolidation on the stock market. So if you just look at stock market capitalization, it's 50% plus. On the good day, it is 55% of the overall global market. And that's interesting because US is 25-28% of the global economy, and the stock market is almost double of that, right? So that means there's so much of concentration sitting there that anything which happens in the US will have a massive effect globally. So in this delicately poised economy, where things have to be done delicately, we have now a barrage of action. And on the left you see just the number of executive orders which has come in 45 days. So 83 executive orders, and obviously not all of them are accumulated, but still a huge chunk are. And an average of the previous administration was 40 in the year. So that's the contrast in terms of how quickly things are moving on this front. And if I were to split and say, look, what are the big fronts where economically we see big changes happening? There's obviously tariff, and it's all over the front pages every day on ET, invent, and so on, which will have implications fundamentally on supply, which will have implications on inflation, and come to it in a minute. Immigration, a huge movement, but the reality is US is a labor-starved economy. So if you want to do something in hospitality, you want to do something in manufacturing, there is that labor you need, and that immigration can have ripple effects on that particular effect. Deregulation, and in fact the last 4 factors are actually reasons why people have been bullish on Trump. Deregulation, focus on AI, focus on robotics, automation, just trying to create a fund and momentum. I think that's a huge one. Corporate personal tax cuts is more about attention of where they are, but maintaining that means essentially a bit more ease of business. And of course, fiscal deficit. I mean, nobody believes that they're going to cut 2 trillion, but even a 500 billion or 300 billion is a fair amount of cut from where they are right now. And then finally, oil. I mean, one could have environmental concerns around it, but the reality is the hard economic truth is more oil in the economy means there's a better lubrication of it. Implications to see globally and compared to US in the moment. So as I said, extremely connected. I mean, look at global flows which are happening across. And typically, when we look at the global economy, I think these 3 dominate. US, Europe, China, almost 70% of the world economy sitting there. And of course, India and Japan the next in line. And the reality is that in each of them now we're going to see a fair amount of disturbance. I mean, US right now, and you're seeing the headlines almost on a daily basis, there is a volatility which is there, which will have implications in terms of its economy, its inflation, and so on and so forth, and come to it. But even in Europe, it has been facing muted growth for a fair amount of time. And there are economies which are far more export-oriented, be it Germany, be it Central Europe, be it countries like Ireland. The reality is those tariffs, and if they escalate, will have an implication. Overlay the Ukraine war and the fact that EU has to spend more on its arms. So there is actually the first time Germany has taken off the limit on how much it's going to arm up. It means there is going to be a fair amount of stress on that overall economy, and that will see as a effect overall. China, we know, has been suffering. I mean, despite the rally in the market right now.